Yeah. Hi, everybody. We're going to talk about DACS tonight. I'm here with Jenna. So just a couple pieces of housekeeping. We are recording this, so please hold your Q&A till the very end. I will send everybody out an email to the recording later this week, and then we just ask that you stay muted with your microphone off. We've got a bunch of us here this evening. So very quickly, Backlog is the name of my company. We're an archival consulting firm. We do a lot of archival needs assessments, coming in, figuring out what the problem is, and then helping you solve it. And then also we do a lot of policy writing. So the big one with that is usually collection development policy. Like, what do we want and like how are we going to get it? I'm Emma. I founded Backlog. Before Backlog, I was a university archivist, and before that, I worked in genealogy reference. So from here, I'm going to hand it over to Jenna for the evening.
Hi, I'm Jenna. So I'm a museum archivist, and before that, I was a university archivist. I'm used to being the only archivist in the organization and collaborating with people from different information backgrounds. So I am going to talk about DACS tonight. Next slide, please. So DACS is describing archives, a content standard. So it is our manual for creating a narrative about aggregate archival materials. So when you think about, oh, I'm describing something in Dublin Core, it's often a photograph or something. You could describe a collection using something like Dublin Core, but DACS is more than a metadata standard. And it's more than and not a metadata standard. It's a guide for how we think about description. So it was first approved in 2004. Around the same time that encoded archival description, or EAD, was approved. There were a lot of changes coming around at the turn of the century, and a lot of changes to how we thought about metadata, how we thought about how computers and the internet and linked data could change our information landscape. So DACS is designed to be compatible with international standards, ISAD-G and ISAR-CPF, which are both mouthfuls. So we think of it as being sort of the American and sometimes Canadian manifestation of these international standards, and can be crosswalked to them. So DACS is appropriate for all material types, whether it's physical materials, digital materials, graphic materials like, say, prints or text, music, maps, whatever. So you could have a collection of photographs, you could have a collection of manuscripts or correspondence, a collection that mixes these things. DACS is appropriate for any type of materials being described. So when this was released, it replaced archives, personal papers, and manuscripts, which was the previous content standard, and that had existed for about 20 years. Next slide, please. So DACS is maintained by the Technical Subcommittee for DACS, which is part of the Society of American Archivists, and it's approved by the SAA Council. So the Society of American Archivists, being our professional body, is not just a place for us to gather as archivists, it's also a body that sort of certifies what standards we ought to be using. So you can access DACS in a couple of different ways if you want to actually read this manual. It's been published as a book. It's also maintained on GitHub from 2016 on. So GitHub is a website for documenting computer code, or it can also be for something text-based like DACS. So it can be revised and republished whenever it's needed without an entire book having to come out. And it's also available as a downloadable PDF if you don't want to read through it in the way that it's formatted on GitHub. Next slide, please. So DACS consists of 25 elements. They're either required or optional. The optional ones are called added value. And there are also optimum levels of description. And so if you are reaching the optimum level of elements being included, then that's the highest standard of description. But there's also a lot of leeway in this content standard for professional judgment or institution-specific guidelines. Perhaps you also have a style guide for your institution that defines how you talk about certain concepts or certain people. And so DACS does not override those things. It is meant to embrace them. Next slide, please. So some general advice for when you are writing a finding aid using DACS. maintain some internal consistency on how you talk about people, topics, and the latter section of DACS talks about archival authorities, which we will get to, and um, maintaining consistency with how you talk about, people, corporate bodies, families, will be an important part of that. DACS, despite us always calling it by its abbreviation, the content standard discourages using abbreviations or acronyms unless you spell them out at least once. So maybe within your institution, you have acronyms and abbreviations that are really common and everyone recognizes them, but you have to be speaking to an audience that is larger than your institution. So putting all possible users first is a priority of DACS. Next slide, please. So DACS begins with a statement of principles and an overview, which I find very thoughtful and grounding, especially when you consider that this is a technical manual. This is technical writing, but these sections of the document address the question: what is archival description and what should it do? Like, why are we doing any of this? What are we trying to accomplish by sitting down and writing a finding aid, which is not not a simple or brief task. These principles guide us to maintain the fonts and organized by the origin, not the subject. Something that I find a lot in my past jobs where I'm always the only archivist is finding collections where they've been organized by what they refer to and not where they came from. So we've really lost the fonts, the original order, the provenance information. So the introductory material of DACS really gets into why it's important to organize according to original order and to maintain that provenance information, and I also, shameless plug, if you look at the Backlog YouTube, I did a webinar on original order a couple of months ago, if you want more content on that. So the 11 principles state values in describing archives and providing access to users. And I'm not going to go through each of them, because also I should add that you're not going to have a full understanding of DACS just from listening to me talk and watching my slides. This is just a guide to help you get through the big document. You have to actually sit down with the big document and read it. And there are also other guides, like SAA has some DACS presentations to help you get through this as well. But I really recommend, like, even if you're not ready to start writing a finding aid yet, sit down and read this introductory material, because I think it really gets at the core of what we're trying to accomplish in writing archival descriptions for large aggregate materials, and how we can prioritize our users' needs. Next slide, please. So DACS has 3 sections. The first part goes over the 25 elements, which are also sections of a finding aid. So we're going to go through all of those. Part 2 deals with archival authority records. So as I mentioned before, how do you consistently talk about a topic or a person, and how do you maintain that consistency over time? And then there are 3 appendices as well. Next slide, please. So in the introduction to archival description at the beginning of the document, there are a couple of key things to note. The sequence of elements is not prescribed. You do not have to do them in any particular order. The elements are all mutually exclusive, so information about a collection can really only go in one place. So you don't have to debate where should this go in this section or that section. DACS also gives options and alternatives when it's giving guidance, and it's very explicit in how it defines something being optional or something being alternative. So it's not just saying, do this thing in this way. You can also do this other thing, or alternatively, this other thing. But it's really explicit as to, like, when alternatives or other options are appropriate. Which I'm probably not explaining it very well, but with the examples that DACS gives, it's much more clear. And DACS is also output agnostic. So it is not saying this is a guide for writing a finding aid in EAD, or this is a guide to writing a finding aid as a Word document, or as a catalog card, or as an archive space record. The standard is the same no matter what you are trying to do with it. And hopefully that will become a little bit more clear as we go through the different chapters, because they're about what we're trying to include and how we want to do that writing rather than what the end product is going to look like. So it's not like, say, like the MLA manual on how to format things. It is a technical but also very qualitative text on kind of guiding us through the writing process. So next slide, please. So I'm just going to go through these chapters. The first chapter is about levels of description. This is not the same as like hierarchical levels in a collection. So you could say like, oh, you've got the series level, the folder level, the item level. This is not that. Unfortunately, they're both called levels of description. So what this refers to are the elements that are required for description at different levels of completeness. So is it, and also like, everything is called a level. This is not great. So you can have single level or multiple level collections. A single level might be just a quick catalog record without any hierarchical information. And a multiple level is for a collection that has a hierarchy. So, but this chapter is not talking about that. It is talking about, are you at the required level or are you at the optimum level? We should probably rethink how we've done this, because we got levels everywhere. So for a collection, regardless of how complicated it is, you can have the basic level where you're just doing required fields for something to be compliant with DACS. You can also have the optimum level, which includes more elements, more details, better information. And if you include any fields beyond that optimum level, that's considered added value. So it's kind of trying to think of a good metaphor. These types of levels or description are like, I don't know, the number of gold stars you can get for your finding aid or your archival description. So the more detailed it is and the more sections it includes, the more gold stars you're going to get. Those are the levels that we're talking about here. But we're also kind of talking about hierarchical levels, because the requirements are different for if you're just talking about a single level collection or a multiple level collection. I think I'm making this worse by continuing to talk about it. So just levels of description. How many stars is your description? Next slide, please. So chapter 2 talks about identity elements. So these are all related to basic information about the origin of the collection and its location. So the required elements are the reference code, which often will be like a collection number according to the naming and numbering schema of the institution. So like MSS 78 or whatever. The name and location of the repository. So like, where is this stuff being kept? The title of the collection, the dates, the extent, how big is it, and the name of the creators if known. And if you want to achieve the optimum level of gold stars, you can also include the administrative and or biographical history of the collection. But you can still write a finding aid that is compliant, just using the required elements. But I know when I write a finding aid, I always do an administrative or biographical history as well. Next slide, please. So chapter 3 is just the content and the structure of the collection. The only required, there are the only two elements here, scope and content, which is required. There's not some information that's scope and some that's content. It's just a scope and content note is kind of what's here and what's not here. So a scope and content note will describe things like, this collection contains personal papers of this particular person, but does not contain anything related to their political career, or only contains materials from a particular trip that they went on, but nothing about the rest of their life outside this particular time period. So it's really like, if you imagine kind of like a spotlight, A spotlight illuminates one area of a stage, and that's what's in our collection. There's lots of room that's outside the spotlight, but the collection is only what's in the spotlight. What's actually here is what we're talking about in the scope of content now. I hope that metaphor works. Well, it'll keep me up later. And then added value is the system of arrangement. So here you can talk about, okay, the original creator organized everything, all of this correspondence alphabetically by person's last name or chronologically. Maybe it was just a desk drawer dumped into a box. So the archivist had to make a lot of interventions to organize the collection. What series is it organized into? The information like that. So that is added value. So that's not required at the basic level. Next slide, please. So chapter 4 talks about the elements regarding access and use of a collection. So these are really important for telling your users if they can actually look at this stuff and how they can physically look at it and what they can do with it. So the conditions governing access defines if there are any restrictions. So this particular series is restricted and no one can access it outside the university, say the institution for 25 years. So say you've got like board of trustees minutes that are closed to outside researchers for 25 years. Or a donor might say, there's a lot of really personal stuff in this correspondence. I would like to wait until after I am dead for this to be open to the public. Whereas the physical access element is information about, oh, this is an offsite storage, so you have to make an appointment beforehand because we have to go get it. Or the original materials are really brittle, so users can only access copies. You can't touch the originals because they're too fragile to be handled. Or just any physical characteristics of the materials that affect how they can be looked at, essentially, and accessed. And then technical access is for describing the software or devices or machines that are necessary to render the materials or view them. So like, oh, this entire thing is on microfilm. So you're going to have to come and sit and use the microfilm reader. So a user will know that going in. And sometimes sometimes a collection, sorry, I'm trying to give an example. So I went to use a collection once where you couldn't use the originals and the copies that you were using were on microfilm. So both of those elements are kind of covered in that type of access restriction. But the conditions governing access type restrictions are more for content rather than the physical or digital use restrictions. Next slide, please. But after a user comes in and looks at the stuff, what can they do with the stuff? So it's really important to include information about copyright, how a researcher can actually use this information, if any of it is, say, proprietary material, have the rights been transferred to the institution or not. Someone might donate their papers, but they still retain the copyright. So if you want to reproduce a photograph, you still have to go back to that person or their estate or their family to get permission. And include information about your repository's licensing or permissions requirements. Because it's really complicated if people can't find the information, they're just going to start emailing people like, I want to reproduce this in my dissertation or in a magazine or in a documentary. It's really great to have some sort of policy related to licensing, permissions requirements, if there are any fees associated, and just link that in your finding aid. So other elements here are the languages and scripts of the material. So is it in English? Is it in Russian? What scripts are used? Like, is some of it in Mandarin? Is it in Cyrillic text? Then there is an element for other finding aids. So you can have a finding aids element within the finding aid. So if there are other types of guides, like maybe there's a collection summary that someone wrote a long time ago, who they weren't an archivist, but they did a really good description of what was in the collection. Perhaps something like that. So of all of these, only conditions governing access, so how to find the thing, how you can come and see it, and languages and scripts of the material are required fields. All of the others are considered added value. Next slide, please. So chapter 5 talks about acquisition and appraisal information. None of these are required fields. And when you think about it, it's because we often don't have this information because people kept really bad provenance records for years and years. Even at my institution, we have provenance records and gift records for a lot of our objects, but no one was keeping that for donated papers or books or manuscripts or photographs. So if you have this information, please include it, but a lot of times you're not going to have it. So the custodial history element is similar to the provenance information in a museum collection. So it's the chain of custody or ownership. This was created by this person. It was given to their child, and then the child donated it. Or this is a manuscript that was collected by, it was passed down, and then it was sold to a collector and went through an auction house, and then it was purchased by one museum and then transferred to our museum. So as well as you could reconstruct the ownership from creation to acquisition. That's really important for establishing the authenticity of documents. And also it's also just part of the history of how these material objects have existed in our world. The immediate source of acquisition is just how the materials got to the repository. Was it a purchase? Was it a gift? It's a bit more detailed than the custodial history, because that might just be chain of custody. The immediate source of acquisition may talk about more about the process of the materials actually getting there. Appraisal, destruction, and scheduling information is for records management. You're probably not going to have this, not even probably, you're not going to have this information for like a 19th century manuscript collection, but you might have this information when you're dealing with, say, university records. So if you have records retention schedules related to certain types of institutional records that are relevant to these materials, you might have some information here. For example, you might have, a DACS compliant finding aid for, say, some university department. And those records, maybe you don't have the full inventory, but you might explain in this section that you might give the records retention schedule for that department. And then you say, after, 7 years, these types of materials are discarded. And the ones that have made it to the archives that we are describing here are these types of materials. So because I'm usually dealing with historical information, I'm not often using this, but that's the sort of thing you would talk about in that element. So these are the product of a records management process. This is the part that's considered, these are the permanent records. Accruals is a section for talking about if you think that more is coming. So whether it's regular transfers from another office or organization, like maybe your repository collects the papers of a local organization and they do a transfer once a year of their old records. Or a donor is going through their papers and you're expecting to get more of them, like when they finish a manuscript or something like that. Or an estate is going through the papers of a particular person and they've donated some, they're going to donate more later when they've kind of gone through them. Maybe the family has to review the papers for personal information first. So, I mean, the number of times I have written additional accruals are not expected in a finding aid is countless, but there's an opportunity here to write out that information if more accruals are in fact coming. Next slide, please. In chapter 6, we're going to talk about related materials, but it's possible that none of these are going to be relevant to your collection, so they're all considered added value fields. So there's a field for existence and location of originals or copies. So maybe this collection is actually just a copy of a collection that exists somewhere else. But maybe the original collection that's at some other institution isn't described very well. And you've got a copy of it that's maybe like a professor's research copy, but you've described it really well. So you can say that the originals are at this other institution, or vice versa. Related archival materials is a field for anything that you think is related to what that you think a user would be interested in that's related to the collection at hand. So maybe they're related by subject, they're related by donor, creator, other attributes, and that's whether they're at your repository or at other repositories. So it's not like you have to separate out, oh, this is the stuff that we have and this is the stuff that other institutions have. You can talk about it all here. And then the publication note is where you can cite published materials that rely on the materials that are being described. So say like this collection of letters has been edited and published as a book, or a person wrote their dissertation on this collection. This is the citation for it. So that's what you would describe in that field. Next slide, please. And then of course, because this is archives, it's always miscellaneous information. So you can have just a notes field, and DACS gives us some advice for in this catch-all element, what kind of information you can put here that doesn't quite fit anywhere else. Next slide, please. In chapter 8, we talk about description control. So this is where you're going to document your revisions to the archival description. So you can, I mean, it could be major stuff, minor stuff. You can say, this is an old finding aid and it contained some language that we no longer use related to illnesses or people. And we rewrote it in 2025. Or it might be, we fixed a typo or we updated a link. So that's description control element is for sort of maintaining the integrity of a document by saying these are the changes that we've made over time. And then I think that this is going to become fraught, but also within this chapter we talk about the right statements for the archival description, not the collection. So yeah, we had the conditions concerning the use of a collection, or excuse me, governing the use of a collection. But what about the conditions governing the use of the description itself? So in this statement, you talk about how the archival description itself, so these long notes that you're writing, can be used or reused. Because it's a lot of times there's a lot of research that goes into them. So you might say this is under Creative Commons license, or this is copyright the university. AI has made this really complicated. Just a personal anecdote. My institution contributes EAD finding aids to an aggregator. So you can search across many, like something like 40 repositories within the state to see the finding aids for all of our collections. And the site has not been working because so many AI bots are crawling the description to train their language models. So we've had to add a prove that you're human CAPTCHA thing to actually use the site so that people can actually find what they're looking for. And I don't know if there's a way for archivists to prevent AI bots from essentially stealing their content and using it to train their language learning models. I don't really know what the future of this is going to look like, but this is just an anecdote and something that I've found out the hard way recently. Next slide, please. So we made it through part 1. In part 2, we're talking about archival authority records. So rather than giving elements that you have to fill out for a finding aid, this section provides guidance on how you're going to write about the entities that are represented in these materials in a standard way, regardless of what section you're working in. Next slide, please. So, and what is an archival authority record? Fortunately, DACS defines it. An archival authority record identifies and describes a personal, family, or corporate entity. So think, a person or like the John Adams family, or a corporate entity like a business that's associated with a body of archival materials. The authority record documents relationships between the records creators, the records created by them, and or the resources about them, and it may control the creation and use of access points in archival descriptions. So in this chapter, there's both very technical information and qualitative information about how you're going to go about identifying the archival authorities for a collection. Who are all of the creators? What are their relationships? What standard way are we going to talk about them? Which is a bit easier if they are included in a controlled vocabulary, like the Library of Congress name authority file or the union list of artist names. But DACS doesn't assume that that's what you're working with. Next slide, please. So older versions of DACS had really specific guidelines on how you format a name, like last name, first name, but also what if it's a last name that has multiple elements? What about, more European or Western styles of naming versus more Asian styles of naming where the family name comes first? Or what about Icelandic last names, which are all patronymics? So the newer version of DACS does not include all of that really specific cultural information. Instead, it provides guidance on dealing with name variants and also identifying corporate bodies. So it's a lot less complicated. Next slide, please. So in chapter 11, there's guidance on what information is most important to include when you're describing a person, a family, or a corporate body. And also specifies the best sources of authority for this information. So like when you think about library cataloging, there are standards which sometimes seem really obvious for where do you find the author's name? Where do you find the publisher's name? What are the approved authorities for this particular information? And in this chapter, there's also example descriptions to kind of help you see what the ideal description looks like, and what information about an entity is going to be the most useful to your users. Next slide, please. So chapter 12 is related corporate bodies, persons, and families. So particularly, so what this chapter talks about is the network of relationships between different people, different families, different corporate bodies. And something to note is that particularly when you're dealing with corporate bodies, it can be really useful to the researcher to have some sort of description of like the part whole of relationships between corporate entities or like hierarchies. So maybe like you have a national organization and then also like a state level organization, and the papers are only related to that state level, but you need to note that it's part of a national or international entity as well. And this is a sort of thing where like when you're talking about it abstractly, it doesn't make a ton of sense. But if you look at specific examples, it makes a bit more sense. And when you're actually working with a collection and you actually have that and that specificity in front of you, it's easier to kind of to apply these concepts. Next slide, please. So when you have your authorities, like this is how we're going to talk about this person, this corporation, this particular family. Maybe you're getting that from a controlled vocabulary, like I said, or maybe it's all local sources. These are materials that are really relevant to your community, but they don't have papers or publications anywhere else. So they're not in any other controlled vocabulary. So if you are creating authority records to standardize how to talk about these people in your own local systems, it's important to cite and explain how you came to decide on how you're referring to each of these people. Maybe you're referring to all the women by their maiden name, or you're formatting maiden name, married name a certain way, or someone had 6 marriages and you have to decide how you're going to format all of their names. So you have to document that somewhere and include information about who created and is maintaining those authority records as an institution. So make sure that you're revisiting and revisiting your authority records and maintaining them as kind of maybe how we think about the concepts of naming people can change. Say 200 years from now, we want to talk about people differently. So it's important to maintain those records and explain where you get the information. Because maybe you decide to refer to a person a certain way based on one particular source. Like perhaps a person writes a letter and they say like they're changing their name, and they say this is how I'm referring to myself from now on. And so to honor that, you use that form. But maybe that's actually a rarer form of the name, and other people refer to that person in a different way. So in your authority record, you can explain that. So you can say that we chose this form of the name because this is how the person referred to themselves, rather than how other people are referring to them because they changed their name for like religious reasons, or they're changing their identity, or building a new one. So I'm getting in the weeds here a little bit, but basically if you're creating authority records and deciding how people in your collection should be talked about, document that and make sure that it's used consistently across your collections. Next slide, please. So related archival materials and resources is a chapter in this section as well as in the previous section. So as I already explained, this is a section of the finding aid where you talk about related stuff. But what this chapter provides is citation guidance. How are you going to cite and describe the related archival materials when you're writing the finding aid? So this is a bit more like, say, an MLA guide or a Turabian guide. So because all archives give different codes and titles to their collections, sometimes it might not seem totally standardized. But this section gives guidance on how to make sure that you are describing a collection in a standardized way so that a user can actually go find it. And the information that you need to include about the repository and its location, or maybe a link to the finding aid of that related collection. Next slide, please. And then there are 3 appendices. So there's the preface from the 2004 version, so the original DACS, and that has significantly changed. I mean, it was rewritten. I mean, the values of archivists have not changed, but our technology has changed. Some of our ways of talking about identity have changed, and our ways of talking about justice and neutrality have changed. So this has all been rewritten, but we're still including the historical material because it's still relevant and still valid. There's an appendix for companion standards that cater to specific materials. So, architectural records, data sets, geographic materials. There are other standards that are related to DACS that are more genre specific, that if you have a really highly technical, highly specified collection, you might also refer to some of these other standards. And then there are crosswalks to the ISAR CPF standard and EAC CPF, which is encoded archival, I'm blanking, for corporations, persons, and families. So for networks of people and entities, that's what that is. And then of course there's also in the international version. So there is information in that appendix about how the same information might be written about in America using DACS or in other countries using the international standard, for example. Next slide, please. So I mentioned at the beginning that DACS is maintained in GitHub. So if you think of past versions of DACS, it might just have a year after it. It's DACS 2004. Or if you think of encoded archival description, there was EAD 2002 and then EAD 3. But DACS has versioning now that's a bit like software to reflect the significance of the changes, like is it something like correcting a typo or is it a major revision, and also the chronology of changes. So the way that's formatted is the year and then a number, and then if it's a major change, a minor change, or if it's just a bug fix. So if you say 2022.0.3.2, which I believe is what we're up to, this is a 2022 version. There hasn't been a major update to the 2022 version. There have been 3 minor updates and 2 bug fixes. So that's what that means. You probably don't have to think about it that much. You're just gonna, look for the most recent version. But if you want to see how DACS has changed over time, that's how each version is described. So users can propose changes through GitHub for the subcommittee to review, and it's all very transparent. It reviews and tracks proposals and revisions through GitHub. So you can really see this suggestion was reviewed and was incorporated, and now it's part of this revision. So it can be kind of overwhelming when you look at GitHub for the first time, especially if you're not a programmer, which I am not. But because it presents information the way that coders think about it and how they think about branches of code and how you structure revisions. But using GitHub and this way of thinking to present a technical manual makes a lot of sense, because then we can see how it changes over time, and we can really extensively document how those changes came to be. Next slide, please. So what do we do with all of this? At the end of all of my technical presentations, it's like, so what now? This has all been very theoretical. But DACS does not dictate how we're going to present this information to users. Like I said before, it's output agnostic. So maybe you're putting stuff in archive space, maybe you're writing a text finding aid in Microsoft Word, and you're posting that as a PDF, or you're printing it out. Maybe you're also encoding in EAD. These are all places where you would be applying the standards of DACS. It is giving, this standard is giving guidance for the sections of how to write a finding aid, what to write and how to write them. And using this standard allows archivists and researchers to share an understanding of what aspects of a collection are most useful to describe, and how best archivists can do so in order to center their users. And it really comes back to something that's mentioned in the introductory material to DACS, that we want to make sure that we are not just saying, here's what's here in this collection. We're stating what we know about the collection, what we don't know, and how we know or don't know it. So we know how this collection is structured. We don't know how it got here. Or there's a 40-year period where we're not really sure who had this in their attic. Or the papers in this collection don't make this relationship between these two entities clear. And so what we know, what we don't know, how we know it. We've done research using these materials, these related archives. And so we're being very upfront about what information comes from the collection, what information comes from outside research. And so the voice of the archivist is not invisible, because we don't want to conflate the influence of the archivist with the intentions of the creator in putting together this collection. So for example, we want to say, like, this was a mess. The archivist organized it in this particular way. So don't infer anything about the creator from the way this collection is arranged or prioritized. Maybe the archivist really prioritized correspondence over other types of writings, but that doesn't mean that the creator did. So it's what we know, what we don't know, how we know it, and also maybe and a little bit of what we did to this collection. And so having a standard, make sure that all the archivists are on the same page, and that using the standard teaches our users what to expect when they want to understand a collection. So that's my piece. Hopefully it made sense. And so if any of it didn't make sense, we can talk about it.
Yeah. So give us 1 second. So our next one's on OAIS. So it's kind of standards for digital preservation. And then Jenna will be back with us in September to do another webinar on more product, less process. All of our webinars, we record them. We post them on our YouTube channel if you want to take a look, including all of Jenna's past webinars, including one on provenance on original order. And if you guys have any questions, we'll hang out for a couple of minutes. If you want to unmute and just shout out your question. We don't have a chat tonight. I really like what you said about how it's output agnostic.
Yeah. It's
Do
a
with what
really
you
nice
will.
phrase for really nice succinct phrase for you can do whatever you want with this standard.
Yeah.
Hi, you mentioned that it was available as a PDF. Is it only available as a PDF if you're actually a member of SAA in order to download it? Or is it available as a PDF if you are not, even if you might want to be?
I will check right now. I believe it's available for everyone, because SAA wants everyone to be using the standard.
Right, thank you.
Let's see. It is also written out. It's also written out. If you literally Google SAA DACS GitHub, it's also actually a format I didn't mention. It's also just as a web page. And I believe somewhere from here, oh yes, and there's a PDF version linked at the top of the page. And I am not logged in as part of SAA, although, oh, okay, I'm getting a 404, which is,
Yeah, I didn't manage to download it, so I
okay.
wondered if it was merely me. But you are
It's-
mentioning that there's a text editor version of it, so
yes. So if you
thank
go
you.
to, it's SAA
Mhm.
hyphen TS hyphen DACS.github.io. I should have put that in the slides, so I apologize for not doing that. Or if you just Google SAA DACS, it should be the first thing that comes up.
Yes.
So you can read it, and there are links to go through all the different sections. But yeah, it seems that they need to update their PDF. So
Thank you.
we need to, I guess I'll tell them.
Thank you.
Okay. All right. If we don't have any other questions, we'll wrap it up here tonight. And again, Jenna will be back in September to talk to us about more product, less process, which we talked to all of our clients about. And so we're hoping to have some referral material here so we can explain it in length. But thank you everybody for joining us, and I'll send out an email later this week with the recording. And I'll put a link to a PDF or the GitHub in it as well. So thank you everybody for joining us this evening.